Yeah, good day, wherever you are in the whole wide world, and you're welcome back to yet another episode of Geo Musings with Mansour. I am your good friend, Mansour Ismaila. And yet again, I'm going to be taking you through today's topic of discourse. Before we go on, I must say a huge thank you to all of you for the fantastic and wonderful reception that you welcomed my very first video with. I am enthused, I am encouraged, I appreciate you a lot, and I thank you for that wonderful and tumultuous welcome. In the last video, we were talking about the discombobulator more correctly. And I remember I promised you that I'm going to answer the question as to did Iran or is Iran currently discombobulating America and Israel in the Middle East, especially vis-a-vis this current war that is going on. Now, let me start this way. There's clear asymmetry. There's clear military asymmetry between the US and Israel on one hand and Iran on the other hand. It's clear that now when you want to battle an adversary that is obviously bigger and more powerful than you, what do? You need to find a way to deactivate, to immobilize, to weaken, and to essentially render that adversary, that bigger adversary, vulnerable to you and vulnerable to your attacks. Let's go. You remember the biblical story of David and Goliath? What did David use? He used a sling, a stone sling, lobbed that stone, and essentially hit, the Goliath right in the smack in the center, of his skull, of his head. In this case, height is not the issue. The issue is military asymmetry. So what did Iran do? Very smart. The first thing it did was to literally poke its fingers in its adversary's eyes and blind it. Yes. It poked its military fingers into the eyes of its adversaries and blinded their eyes. And everything it did thereafter essentially became easier because Iran's military adversary did not see anymore. What do I mean? I welcome you to the concept of the radar in military physics. The radar. What is the radar? The radar is essentially, a kind of contraption, a kind of electromagnetic contraption that's usually deployed by superpowers, frankly, not middle powers or countries that are really not, particularly powerful in the scheme of things in terms of military gear. Radar is essentially what helps fighter jets, warships, any and everything that is involved in military activity, especially that is mobile. Do you understand? Moving in from one point to the other point to do damage, to fire bombs, to fire missiles, to fire munitions. Radar is what they use to see. It's what they use to find themselves. Think of the atmosphere. Think of the air. There are not exactly address signposts, in the avalanche of the air. Think of the sea, the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. You will simply be lost. You simply cannot find yourself. So it is radar that both civilian and military, planes, civilian planes, military fighter jets, aircraft carriers, ships like aircraft carriers, like destroyers, all sorts of things that fly, even missiles. Radars is what they use to find themselves in the avalanche of the atmosphere and the seas. Now, how does it work? Point A, let me give you an example. Point A is Iran. A missile is taken off, let's say from Tehran or from Tabriz in Iran, and it wants to land somewhere in Tel Aviv or in Gush Dan in Israel. What the radar essentially does is that it helps to see. Now, a radar installation that is close to Tabriz, maybe in a nearby country, maybe at Al Udeid in Qatar, Al Udeid military base in Qatar, it is owned and run by America, or Dafra in the UAE, or several bases like that. There is a radar in Al Udeid in Qatar. Qatar is close contiguously to Tabriz or Tehran in Iran. The moment the missile takes off, the radar at Al Udeid sees the takeoff. It instantly sends, we are talking microseconds here, near instant. It instantly sends, a message to American and all Israeli satellites in space. Local man has taken off from Tabriz in Iran. Well before the missile gets anywhere near Israeli airspace, let's say Jordan, let's say Syria, let's say Egypt, the radar message has gone by far faster than it. And than the missile itself. And the radar has informed, every radar along the path. Maybe there's another radar somewhere in the UAE, there's another radar somewhere in Syria, there's another radar somewhere in Jordan. It is essentially communicating the current location of that missile, far faster, far ahead, in microseconds. Missiles will usually do minutes. Do you understand? Far ahead. So that at those points, when the radars see, having communicated with satellites in space, those satellites will communicate back to the radar, as in to the radar that is closer to Tel Aviv, where the missile is landing. And then those now communicate with the anti-missile system. And I'm sure you've heard of Patriot anti-missile system. You've heard of THAAD anti-missile system. We will discuss the difference and the physics on another day. So the message that the missile is coming has already been gotten by the radar ahead, and has passed the message again to the anti-missile system along the route of the missile. And that way, it is easy to calculate the path of the missile and then fire interceptor missiles to take it down. That is how radars work. Radars are also what fighter jets use to find themselves. Where am I? Where do I want to take off? Where do I want to land? Where do I want to fire my missiles? Radars are also what ships, aircraft carriers, destroyers, even civilian ships. That is what they used to find themselves in the avalanche of the seas. Where exactly am I going? Where am I coming from? Where am I exactly at this time? How much distance does it, as in do I need to cover? Which direction do I need to turn to? So that is essentially how radars work. And Iran what did they do? They started picking off those American radars one after the other. That was the very first thing they did on Saturday. They didn't even focus on retaliating for the murder of the supreme leader. They didn't focus on killing civilians like Israel usually does. They didn't focus on destroying military bases or anything like that. They didn't focus on bombing airports or seaports or any of those installations. They focused on the military eyes of the United States of America. And those radars can be very expensive. There is one at Al Udeid, I've forgotten the technical name. It is alphabets and numbers. It costs as much as $1.1 billion. Iran destroyed it with a $30,000 drone. It's called the Shahed 136. I'm sure you are conversant with that name. Imagine destroying $1.1 billion with $30,000. The math will not even math. There is no way the math will math. So they destroyed the radar at Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE. They destroyed the radar at Al Udeid. They destroyed the radar at the headquarters of the US 5th Fleet in Bahrain. They destroyed the radar at the Muwafaq al-Sauti military base in Jordan. They started picketing, radars one after the other. And largely, they rendered the United States of America, and to some extent, Israeli fighter jets and other fighting machines, essentially blind. And that was the beginning of trouble on Saturday and Sunday. Now, what were the consequences of this action of Iran? What did Iran use this blinding of America and the US militarily to do? How did they weaponize this blinding? How did they take advantage of what they have done with respect to taking down, these radar installations? That will be the topic of our next video. Again, I thank you for joining me on this episode of Geo Musings with Mansour, and I hope that you will join me in the next episode. Have a very good day. Thank you very much.